You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to Digging Up Ancient Aliens, the podcast where we examine alternative history and ancient aliens as presented in popular media. Do these claims hold water to an archaeologist, or are there better explanations out there? We are now on episode 69. It should be 69 at least, and I am Frederick, your guide into the world of pseudo-archaeology. So when this episode comes up, I will just have arrived back from the most northern part of Sweden where I've been hiking, and this will be an episode that will be a bit of a primer for the next episode that will be about the Kensington runestone. But this episode will deal with Viking archaeology, not really that we will bust pseudo-archaeology within the Viking field, because, there's plenty of weird claims about the Vikings, but this will be more exploring a Viking settlement. As you might know, I've released an app giving guided tours that you can use both on location and at home. And what we will hear in this episode is a section from this app where we explore Kungsgården, where, the chieftain of Birka had his location, and we talk a little bit about the archaeology there and the different monuments. And while it's fun to bust the pseudo-archaeological claims and myth, we should also provide more information and new information so we can educate ourselves and replace these bad ideas with new interesting ideas. So this will be a section from the app Historian where we explore Kungsgården. And if you want to download the app, go ahead and do so. More tours are coming there very soon. We will explore the Viking settlement in modern Canada. There will be more locations in Sweden, Rome. So I think it will be very interesting going forward. And if you go to the show's transcript, you will be able to find pictures from Kungsgården and Adelsö if you want to see how everything looks over there. But before we get to all of that, I want to thank those who financially support the show, either through Patreon or the membership portal. And for all you supporters, there is a new bonus episode coming up this week or early next week, depending a little bit on how the recordings and everything lines up for the future me. And if you want to become a supporter, I will tell you exactly where to go at the end of this episode. Now, with all of this out of the way, let's dig into the episode. Welcome to Adelsö and into the world of the Vikings. We stand in a landscape that's been under constant change since the giant Ice Age glaciers retreated thousands of years ago. It is here that our story begins, in the sea. With the massive glaciers gone, the land slowly rose from the dark waters. Initially, Adelsö was just a tiny island in a growing archipelago, but it wasn't long before humans started to settle here, drawn by its strategic location and new resources. From their remains, we can see that these immigrants primarily lived off fishing and seal hunting. However, the landscape would continue to change. New eras would introduce new technologies, materials, and contacts far beyond Little Adelsö. Each advancement, from the use of stone to copper and then to bronze, marked a significant shift in the island's history. Times of unrest came. Iron replaced bronze, further shaping Adelsö development. 2 hill fortifications were built on Adelsö, one at Skansenberget and one at Gladhamn. a testament to the island's strategic importance. Our saga here will take place at the end of the Iron Age, a time of exploration and long-distance contact, and a time when much was changing in what would become Sweden. The period we will explore here in the area will mostly take place during the Vendel period and the Viking Age. Let us now step into history together. In front of you, you can now see the so-called royal mounds. Although they do not reach the impressive dimension of the famous mounds at Gamla Uppsala, these graves bear an important testimony to the significance of this site. These monumental graves were intended for the most prominent members of society. The ones before us has yet not been explored through excavations, leaving the identities of those resting within shrouded in a bit of mystery. Now we hope that these graves are undisturbed from looting, allowing further archaeologists to give us more profound insights of the people resting inside. Burial costumes during the Viking Age varied greatly, and there was no uniform burial system. For example, at Birka, just located across the water, we have discovered chamber graves, a method where a chamber was dug out and furnished for the deceased. 11 such graves have been found at Birka, all filled with stones, raising the question of whether these were once covered by burial mounds that has collapsed over time, filling up these spaces. We also find other types of graves, such as flat graves, ship burials, and simple earth burials without any ceremonial addition. Then, of course, we have burial mounds, and this is a tradition that dates back all the way to the Neolithic period, the Stone Age, and this practice have continued to be a part of the burial tradition in Scandinavia throughout the Bronze Age, all the way into the Iron Age, including the Viking Age. Particularly during the Vendel period and the Viking Age, it was popular to erect what we call royal mounds. A notable example includes those at Gamla Uppsala and of course Anundshög near Västerås. These impressive burial mounds, which also include Högom in Medelpad and Nordinjans mound in Uppland, differ from other mounds in their sheer size. A mound is considered a royal mound if it has a diameter of at least 30 meters. Those more prominent than 20 but still smaller than 30 are classified as just large mounds. And large mounds were very popular during the Bronze Age and even more popular during the Vendel and Viking periods. Let's leave this area and walk towards one of the excavated mounds to explore more about life and death during this fascinating era. Now we stand before a mound that's known as Skopintull, and this name, it sparked curiosity and has led to various different theories about this name's origin. Does the name come from the idea that this was the place where people changed into their Sunday shoes before attending church? Others speculate that the name has something to do with the Russian raids taking place, or is it perhaps a completely different explanation behind the name? What we do know is that this mound was excavated under the leadership of one of Sweden's first female archaeologists, Hanna Ryd, amid the raging war in 1917. Although the excavation were carried out in 1917, it was not until 1936 that Ryd published her findings, and it would take even longer until 2013 before more of the mound's mystery would be unveiled. During her excavation, Ryd discovered a layer of burnt material with a large amount of skeletal remains. In total, Ryd found up towards 36 kilos of bones, mostly from animals, and we find horses, dogs, and even a cat among these bones. Additionally, she found pigs, sheep, cow, and various birds, including sea eagle, goshawk, chicken, and crane. Interestingly, osteological evidence indicated 2 humans were put to rest here, likely a man and a woman, but the identity of these people remains unfortunately unclear. The grave goods discovered were considerably rich, and they include bridles, combs, knives, game pieces, and even a shield. The clothes of the buried individuals appear to have their origins in the Orient. They are richly decorated with gold threads, something we don't really see in Scandinavia. And the ceremony seems to have been conducted by placing the bodies and other goods in a boat that was then set on fire. The collected remains were then placed in a copper kettle, which was examined more closely in 2013. During this examination, researchers found an egg and a lock of hair, the significance of which and whom the hair belonged to remains a little bit of a mystery. This grave clearly indicates that those who rest here were part of the society's upper class. Based on the items in the grave, we know that these individuals lived during the first half of the 10th century. Now, it's time to leave a scooping tool behind and continue our journey through history towards encountering a new religion that would profoundly and enduringly reshape Sweden. Before us now stands a clear symbol of change in the Viking society. The contacts with the continent introduced not only new technologies and goods to Scandinavia, but also new ideas and gods. The Christianization of Scandinavia was a long and complex process. While threats of violence likely occurred, the conversion did not take place by the sword or the axe. Instead, Christianity crept in through trade, mission, and interaction with thralls. When a new, more potent royal power embraced this new faith, it began to drive a Europeization of Sweden, establishing laws that compelled people to adopt Christianity, which of course accelerated the conversion. Olof Skötkonung was the first Christian king of Sweden who actively promoted the new faith by, in part, minting coins, but also proselytization. Despite the official embrace of Christianity, traces of the Old Norse religion survived quietly, and it's unclear when it's finally disappeared completely, mainly due to different laws that forbade pagan practices, making these religion go underground. Looking closer at the building before us, we see it's a classic medieval hall church, characteristic of its time. This means that it has a nave and a chancel of the same height without a distinct separation between these two parts, a detail you can observe if you go inside the church. There are theories that a wooden church once stood on this site, but no physical evidence has yet been found of this. What we do know is that the first stone church here were likely ordered to be built by the king at the end of the 12th century. Initially, it was without a bell tower and with a narrow nave and a lower chancel that had a pass in the shape of a semicircle. The first major reconstruction of the church took place in the 14th century, and the church was then expanded to its current appearance, and a tower was added. A wooden porch was also built in the 14th century, but after a fire, it was reconstructed in the 17th century. However, during the 18th century, the church bell was moved from an external belfry into the tower, and in the 19th century, the porch was demolished and the entrance was moved to its current location. in the bell tower. Inside the church we find the baptismal font, one of the few furnishings from the church early days, simple in its design and made of coarse sandstone in the 12th century. It is one of the few furnishings from the church early days. If you look up towards the sacristy, you will notice a crucifix from the 14th century above the door. Inside the sacristy is another crucifix from the 14th century, originally part of a now lost altarpiece. And while we are in the sacristy, let's look at the northern wall. Here we can see 2 runestones embedded in the wall. There was also a third runestone in the church, which unfortunately was lost in the porch fire we talked about earlier. The surviving stones are labeled U1 and U10. The left stone, U10, its origin is somewhat mysterious. It was found in a gravel pit and after that brought to the church. The stone has 2 lines of text which read Aft öpti standi steinsar och Loki gerthi. And in English, this is translated to the stone was raised after Öpir and Loki made it. The stone has been broken off, but we can assume that Loki was also the one who carved it. And if we look at the right stone, U1, we can see that it's probably younger, and we can see this due to how the serpent is shaped and the serpent's design on the stone. And the inscription read, Askil let rätta stein thenna aftir fader sin bonda goda. In English, it teaches us that Eskil raised the stone in memory of his father, who was a good man. Now let's leave the church and continue to our next site. We now stand in a place where the land elevation has transformed the landscape over the millennia, and I want to take us back in time for a little bit to the year 1075, and at this time the water was a full 6 meters higher than today. This means that during the Viking Age, the water edge was just a short distance from where we now stand. Here, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of what once was the harbor of Kungsgården and Adelsö, and we can only imagine what it must have been like on this harbor. Imagine all the ships arriving, unloading their goods. We see missionaries, we see soldiers, we have diplomats, all stopping by to visit the king at the great hall that once stood here. And against this backdrop, erecting a runestone here would have been a great honor, only reserved for distinguished individuals. And the 6-ton runestone we stand before tells a little bit of a different story. As you approach the stone, let yourself be captivated by the exquisite craftsmanship and richness of details of the rune master's work. The dragon loop that encircles the stone and bites its own tail is an artistic expression and a time marker. Just as fashion trends shift over time, this loop reflects a style known as the Middle Urn style, or PR4 if you're more academically inclined. And researchers have been able to distinguish 8 different styles which can help us date runestones. Thanks to this style, we can determine the year of the stone could have been made and which king might be mentioned on it. It is important to note that the red paint now highlighting the runes is a modern addition, intended to make the inscription stand out a bit better for us and so we can read them a bit better. Originally, the stone was an explosion of colors, decorating black, white, red, and many other colors, which made it a striking sight for all who arrived at the harbor. And the inscription on the stone tells us a fascinating story. Rath thu runar, rätt lätt rista tolir bryti i rothi kungi, Tolir och Gyla letu rista. Than hion after sik merki. Håkon bad rista. And if we translate this to English, we can read, interpret these runes. The right to carve them was granted by the king to Tolir, the steward in Roden. Tolir and Gylla, the couple, had this monument raised in their memory. Håkon ordered the carving. And what's really fascinating about this stone is that Tolir refers to himself as a bryte, and this is a particular class of thralls or slaves. Like in other cultures, slaves in Viking society could become free. However, there was a catch. Even if they became free, and we have examples like Toki, who we know was freed, you would not get the same legal status as a born free man. Once a thrall, always a thrall. But it's worth noting that Tolir, with his position, must have had quite a bit of power, even though he was not a free man per se. And this may explain why Tolir emphasizes that he had the right and the permission to erect a stone. Slaves also did not have the right to marry, which suggests that Tolir had become free but still retained his title. The Viking Age view of class and beauty adds another layer to this story. Unlike today's society, where class is often associated with economy or inheritance, Vikings put a higher value on physical beauty, especially among men. And this idea can be seen in myth and legend, such as in the work of Rigstula. In this text, the aesthetic aspect of the social hierarchy is highlighted throughout the story, from the humble yet ugly thralls to the noble and extremely beautiful earls. The one who created the classes was, according to this story, Heimdall, who shared bed with 3 different families, all which had different physical attributes. And the result is that the thrall is born ugly and suited therefore for simple tasks. Free men became robust, healthy-looking people, and of course was given tasks more suitable for their appearance. And the earl, of course, became the most beautiful person in the world. And this is why we see how skalds in the Viking society always trying to make sure to find something, no matter how tiny detail they can find, to describe as something as extremely beautiful on the earl. And through this brief text written on the stone, we can open a sort of window to the past, a glimpse to the everyday life and values of those who lived during the Viking Age. Let us now continue our journey to our next station. During the Viking Age, we would have been standing in the middle of the historic harbor of Alsnö, where the boats would have come and go to unload their goods or people. Today, instead, we see grasslands and trees, and if you look past the trees, if you can, you will see where the water is today. But beneath the surface, archaeologists have discovered a fascinating defensive structure made out of stakes, and these stakes are believed to have been part of a protective barrier strategically designed to prevent enemy ships from attacking the harbor freely. The defensive system forms a semicircle in the water with a deliberate opening, a channel that allows ships to enter the harbor one at a time. It's possible that this structure also served a dual function as a breakwater, protecting the harbor from storms and high waves. This is a testament to the engineering prowess of the Viking Age and their ability to create structure that served multiple purposes, both practical and defense-related. Let us now leave the secrets of the water behind us and walk upwards towards the once majestic Alsnö hus. Welcome to what once was a royal palace. Today perhaps a mere shadow of its former self, but 800 years ago, this site was dominated by an impressive 3-story building. By the architectural standard of the time, this was truly a spectacle. The foundation, which still can be seen today, is made out of stone, but the palace itself was made out of brick, a material regarded both as novel and luxurious in Sweden at this time in history. And there are stories etched into the walls and even the material used during construction. For example, a very proud master builder named Bove left his mark on a brick, and he carved this mark in runes, not once but twice on this brick, showing that runes were still used in this area during what we would call the Middle Ages. Now, the earliest evidence of Asnehus' origins is a coin found on the site. The oldest dating of this coin is to Valdemar Birgersson's reign between 1266 and 1275. Archaeologists discovered the coin among the stones in the foundation, indicating that it was dropped during this early stage of construction, and the palace was likely built over the earlier royal manor in the area. However, neither post holes or other remains of this former manor has been found. Asnehus extended 30 meters in length and 14 meters width. Its ground floor holds traces of grandeur, evidenced by ornately decorated brick floor tiles and an impressive fireplace. A brick wall separated part of the room and the western part of the building, and we also found wooden floors. And this floor was found by archaeologist Bengt Tordeman, and he found them in a very charred state during his excavations in 1920. And the oldest known depiction surviving to our days of Asnehus is from a survey map dated to 1751, showing a building with a gateway, tower and barrel walls. This, along with architectural comparison and historical documents, had led to new insights into what the building might have looked like. Previously, it was believed that the palace only had 2 floors, but now is thought to likely have had 3, as I mentioned before. The architectural inspiration behind Asnehus seems to have been Håkon Håkonsson's palace in Bergen, known as Håkonhallen or Bergens Hus, completed in 1251. Håkon Håkonsson was the king of Norway during this era, and the similarities between these two regal buildings perhaps underscore the Swedish king Magnus Ladulås' desire to erect an equally impressive palace. The main difference is that Håkonshallen also features a defensive tower, which has not been found yet at Adelsö. However, 2 stone-walled cellars have been rediscovered just west outside of the building. The function of the cellars has not yet been fully explained, but perhaps they were part of a defensive tower. But Asnehus is not just a site of architectural admiration. It was here that one of Sweden's most significant legal documents, the Asnö Statute, was created under the leadership of King Magnus Ladulås. This statute changed the foundation of the Swedish nobility by offering tax exemption for those who contribute soldiers and warriors, and marked the end of the nobles' right to demand lodging and food from the peasantry without compensating the peasant where they stayed for the night. The glory days of Asnehus was short but glamorous. After 1304, no king dated a letter from Asnö, something Ander Öhman attributes to the emergence of Stockholm Castle. Stockholm Castle appears to have been built around the year 1300, which would align well with the abandonment of Asnö. However, there are some mysteries surrounding the downfall of this house. Numerous crossbow bolts have been found around the site, and some suggest that the Vitalia brothers might have burnt down the house, and these were German privateers who wanted to restore King Albert to the throne. But this must have occurred after 1389, indicating that the site retained some sort of significance long after 1304. Welcome home. In front of us we can now see a reconstructed Viking Age house. This farmstead reflects a typical residence for the free, somewhat wealthier, smaller landowner in the Viking society. Here we will be able to find 2 or perhaps, depending on the wealth of the family, 3 buildings, which would have been typical. Some of these farms could also have included 1 or 2 pit houses, partially dug-in workshops building that were an important part of the Viking Age farm. Interestingly, we know less about the Viking Age dwelling than earlier periods in the Iron Age. However, archaeological studies indicate that the housing pattern were relatively consistent over time. Since the Bronze Age, the dominant construction method in Sweden has been the 3-aisled longhouse. This type of building was supported by several pairs of posts that held up the roof, while the walls would have been made out of wattle, daub, earth, turf, or stone, depending on the available materials in the area. Depending on the size of the house, it could have contained several sections, including a kitchen area, sleeping quarters, stables, storage, as well as room for entertainment and living. Towards the end of the Viking Age, around the year 900, a new architectural design began to emerge, especially in the southern part of Scandinavia. Here we find the Trelleborg houses, a typical building we see in the Trelleborgs built under the rule of Harald Bluetooth in Denmark. These houses were considerably wider than the earlier ones, up to 12 meters in width, and they could also have a second floor. But on Gotland, the houses started to take another appearance, and these were smaller in size and had only one central aisle, but the roof was supported by strong walls instead of columns, as we see in the long houses in mainland Sweden. Although we can't showcase one of these so-called pit houses at this site, they represent one of the most fascinating aspects of Viking Age innovation. These structures have been linked to the introduction of the sail in Scandinavia, and this invention revolutionized the Scandinavians' way of exploring and conquering. The presence of sails in Scandinavia does not appear to have been established until the late Iron Age, making the term the Age of Sails, or perhaps the Sail Era, a more fitting description than the term we use today, the Viking Age or the Viking period. According to available sources, the sails were primarily made out of wool and treated with fat tallow or fish oil to make them windproof and durable. And the process of creating a sail was highly time-consuming. Lise Bender Jørgensen has estimated that a wool sail for an average longship required about 90 square meters of fabric. Considering a skilled spinner could produce maybe between 30 to 50 meters of yarn per hour, it would mean that 4,800 working hours was needed just to spin the thread needed, and additional 3,200 hours to weave the fabric itself. And this equates to, in modern Swedish working hours, 4 years of work. excluding the time it takes to harvest and process the wool. Moreover, considering the need for additional equipment for voyages such as extra sails, tents, clothing, provisions for a crew of up to 32 sailors, it could take up to 24 years to fully equip a ship with just the textiles needed for their travel. And with all this in mind, it seems as the Viking Age must have been a very flourishing period for sheep owners. Estimates show that nearly 1 million square meters of wool were needed for this massive production of sails, clothing, and other equipment needed for these voyages. And to produce this amount of wool, it would have been needed about 2 million sheep. This demand for wool led to significant societal changes where small farms started to merge into larger units to kind of streamline production. As we already mentioned, with this new farm structure, we start to see these pit houses emerging on these farms where archaeologists have found evidence of textile production in the form of loom weights and even looms. It is unlikely that the free women on the farm would have done all this work. Instead, evidence indicates that this was a responsibility that fell on the thralls, and the condition in these weaving houses must have been very harsh. They worked with poor light, and the air must have become full with wool particles, especially at the end of the day, making the work environment both suffocating and unhealthy. And this increased demand for labor to meet the production of sails and other necessities may have been one of the driving forces behind the Viking raids. More labor enabled greater production, leading to larger armies and the need for even more textiles and more labor. And this created self-reinforcing cycles where slaves were captured during raids and sold into existing trade networks. By the beginning of the 11th century, some Viking fleets would comprise of 200 ships. Slavery thus formed a fundamental part of the Viking society. Without slavery, there would be no Viking Age. And that wraps up this episode. Remember, next time we're talking about the Kensington runestone. Is it real? Is it a hoax? Is it somewhere in between? Let's explore this stone together. So, if you want to support the show, I would recommend you going to patreon.com/diggingupancientaliens or head over to the members portal over at diggingupancientaliens.com/support. If you become a member for a small fee, you get bonus content, you get early episode, ad-free episode, all of that good stuff. And also in the future, there are going to be live streams that you will be able to participate in if you are a supporter. But if you want to support the show but with, not money, that's possible too. Just give a review. That's the best way to support the show without giving out any monies for it. Just write a 5-star review, some kind word, and it really helps us in the ranking. Or even better, tell a few friends about the show, get them listening or watching over on YouTube. Now, that was all I had for this episode. So what's left is to tell you that the intro music was written by Sandra Martelor and the outro is by the amazing band called Trallskruv, and links to both of these artists are found in the show notes. All music is used with permission. So until next time, keep shoveling that science.
Men jag